You won't believe this, but I actually died once. Yep, heart stopped, no pulse, flatline. And yet, here I am, sitting in my cozy Ohio living room, telling you what it was like on the other side. Sounds impossible, doesn't it? But I'm not alone. Thousands of folks, especially us seniors who've seen a few decades come and go, have stories like mine, moments where we crossed over and came back with something to share. We've lived through wars, recessions, and personal losses, and we've earned the right to wonder what happens when the curtain falls. Today, I'm not just sharing my story. I'm telling you about Margaret, an 80-year-old woman who was blind for 30 years but saw everything during her near-death experience. Her story will make you rethink life, death, and everything in between. So, grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's take this journey together. Part 1, Margaret's Life, A World in Darkness. Let's start with Margaret. She's one of those people you can't help but admire, a tough, kind-hearted woman from a small town in Ohio called Marietta, right along the river. Born in 1945, Margaret grew up during the tail end of the Great Depression, when folks made do with patched clothes and shared suppers. Her daddy was a factory worker, her mama a seamstress, and they taught her to keep her chin up no matter what life threw her way. She married her high school sweetheart, Frank, at 19, and they built a life together, 2 kids, a modest house with a picket fence, and a garden where Margaret grew roses that won ribbons at the county fair. But life wasn't always kind. When Margaret was 50, glaucoma stole her sight. It started with blurry spots, then tunnel vision, and finally, darkness. Doctors tried everything, surgeries, medications, but nothing worked. By 1995, her world was gone. I remember the day it all went black, Margaret told me, her voice soft but steady. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee, and it was like someone turned off the lights. I thought it was a headache at first, but it never came back. It felt like I'd lost half of who I was. For 30 years, Margaret lived in that darkness. She learned to navigate her home by touch, counting steps from the couch to the kitchen. Her daughter, Susan, moved back to Marietta to help, driving her to appointments and reading her mail. Margaret's grandkids, Tommy and Ellie, would describe their school plays in vivid detail, painting pictures with words so she could see them. But oh, how she missed their faces. She missed the Ohio River at sunset, the way the water turned gold and pink. She missed Frank's smile. He'd passed away in 2015 from a stroke, leaving her heart as empty as her eyes. Despite it all, Margaret was a fighter. She joined a local knitting group, her fingers deftly working the needles by feel. She listened to audiobooks, her favorite being old Agatha Christie mysteries. And she never lost her faith, attending St. Mary's Church every Sunday, where she'd pray for strength and, quietly, for a miracle. But at 80, she figured her days of miracles were long gone. She was wrong. Part 2, the day everything changed. It was a Tuesday in May 2025, warm and breezy in Marietta. Margaret was at Marietta Memorial Hospital for a routine checkup. Her heart had been acting up for years, nothing too serious, just some palpitations that her cardiologist kept in check with pills. She wasn't worried. She'd been through worse: childbirth, Frank's death, losing her sight. A few tests? No big deal. Susan drove her to the hospital, chatting about Tommy's baseball game and Ellie's new art project. Margaret sat in the passenger seat, her cane across her lap, smiling as she listened. They checked in, and Margaret was wheeled to the cardiology unit for an EKG and some blood work. Everything seemed fine. The nurse, a cheerful woman named Linda, joked about the hospital cafeteria's terrible coffee. Margaret laughed, feeling at ease. But then, without warning, everything changed. As the technician adjusted the EKG leads, Margaret felt a sharp pain in her chest, like a fist squeezing her heart. She gasped, her hands clutching the armrests. "Susan," she whispered, but before her daughter could respond, Margaret's world went silent. Her heart stopped. For 9 minutes, Margaret was clinically dead, no pulse, no breath, no brain activity. The room erupted into chaos. Doctors rushed in, shouting orders. A nurse started chest compressions, counting aloud. Susan stood frozen in the corner, tears streaming down her face, praying harder than she ever had. But Margaret? She wasn't there. Not really. She was somewhere else entirely. Part 3, Out of Her Body, Seeing the Unseen. What happened next is something Margaret still struggles to put into words. It wasn't like falling asleep or waking up. It was different. One moment she was in pain, and the next she was free. "I felt myself lift up," she told me, her voice trembling with awe. "It was like I was floating, light as a feather. And then I looked down, and there I was, lying on that hospital bed, pale as a ghost. I could see the doctors working on me, hear the machines beeping. But here's the thing, I could see. I hadn't seen a thing in 30 years, but I saw everything clear as day." Margaret described it like watching a movie, but sharper, more vivid. She saw the doctors' faces, Dr. Patel, with his furrowed brow, barking orders, Nurse Linda, pumping her chest with steady hands. She saw Susan in the corner, her hands clasped, lips moving in silent prayer. But what struck her most was the absence of pain. No chest pain, no fear, no sadness. Just peace, like being wrapped in a warm blanket on a cold winter night. "I wasn't scared," she said. "I felt right. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." As she hovered above her body, Margaret noticed something odd. A pen slipped out of Dr. Patel's pocket, clattering to the floor and rolling toward the window. It stopped just under the sill, glinting in the sunlight. Later, Dr. Patel walked over, picked it up, and slipped it back into his pocket, barely pausing in his efforts to save her. That pen would become the key to everything. Part 4, The Tunnel and the Light, A Journey Beyond. As Margaret watched the scene below, she felt a gentle pull, like a current tugging her away. The hospital room began to fade, and she found herself moving through a tunnel, a long, dark tunnel with a brilliant light at the end. "It wasn't scary," she said. "It was beautiful. The light was so bright, but it didn't hurt my eyes. It was warm, welcoming, like it was calling me home." As she moved closer, the light grew stronger, enveloping her in a love so profound it brought tears to her eyes. It wasn't just light, it was alive, pulsing with wisdom, compassion, and truth. Some might call it God, others, the source. Margaret just called it love. And then, she saw them. Standing in the light, smiling, were her mother, Clara, and her husband, Frank. Clara, who'd died of cancer in 2005, looked young again, her gray hair now a vibrant auburn, her eyes sparkling. Frank, who'd been frail in his final years, stood tall, his familiar grin lighting up his face. "I wanted to run to them," Margaret said, her voice breaking. "They looked so happy, so alive." Mama reached out her hand, and Frank waved, like he was saying, "Hey, darlin', good to see you." But as she moved toward them, a voice, soft, gentle, but firm, stopped her. It wasn't a voice she heard with her ears, but one that echoed in her soul. "It's not your time yet," it said. You have more to do." Margaret protested. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to stay with her mother and Frank, to bask in that love forever. But the voice was insistent, and before she knew it, she was being pulled back through the tunnel, back to the hospital, back to her body. Part 5, Waking Up, a Miracle Confirmed. When Margaret opened her eyes, she was back in the hospital bed, surrounded by beeping machines and stunned doctors. Susan was sobbing, holding her hand, whispering, "Mama, you're back." Margaret was weak, her chest sore from the compressions, but she was alive. And she had a story to tell. As soon as she could speak, Margaret turned to Dr. Patel. "You dropped your pen," she said. "It fell out of your pocket and rolled under the window. You picked it up." Dr. Patel's jaw dropped. "How could you know that?" he asked. "You were unconscious. And you're blind." Margaret smiled. "I saw it," she said simply. "I saw everything." The room fell silent. Nurse Linda crossed herself. Susan squeezed her mother's hand, tears streaming down her face. They all knew something extraordinary had happened. Part 6, A Changed Woman, Life After Death. Margaret's NDE didn't just bring her back to life, it gave her a new life. She was still blind, still 80, still dealing with heart issues. But she was different. The fear of death that had lingered in the back of her mind was gone. In its place was a deep, unshakable peace. "Death isn't the end," she told me. "It's just a doorway. And on the other side, there's love, light, and everyone we've ever lost. I'm not afraid anymore." But it wasn't just her view of death that changed. Margaret started living more fully. She spent more time with Susan and her grandkids, listening to their stories with a new kind of attention. She went back to her knitting group, laughing louder, sharing more. She even started a journal, dictating her thoughts to a recorder, capturing memories and lessons for her family. Her faith deepened too. Margaret had always been a churchgoer, but now her prayers were more personal, more heartfelt. She felt a connection to something greater, something she'd touched in that light. "I don't know if it was God or an angel," she said. "But it was real. I felt it." Margaret also became a storyteller. She shared her NDE with her church group, her neighbors, anyone who would listen. Some called it a miracle, others a hallucination. Margaret didn't care. "I know what I saw," she said. "And I want others to know there's nothing to fear." Part 7, Other Voices, Stories of the Elderly. Margaret's story isn't unique. Across America, elderly people have reported similar experiences, each one a testament to the power of NDEs. Let me share a few more. There's John, a 75-year-old from San Antonio, Texas. John was gardening one hot summer day when he had a heart attack. As the paramedics worked to save him, he found himself standing in a field, face to face with his late wife, Mary, who'd died of breast cancer a decade earlier. "She looked like she did when we met in '68, John said, his voice thick with emotion. "Young, beautiful, with that smile that could light up a room. She told me to go back, that our kids needed me. I didn't want to leave her, but I did." John woke up in the hospital, his chest aching but his heart full. He says that seeing Mary gave him the strength to recover and reconnect with his family. "I call my kids every day now," he said. "I don't take a single moment for granted." Then there's Sarah, an 82-year-old from Sacramento, California. Sarah had a stroke in 2024 and slipped into a coma. During her NDE, she saw a bright light and felt herself being pulled toward it. It was like coming home, she said. I saw my parents, my brother, even my old dog, Rusty. They were all there, waiting for me. But a voice told her it wasn't her time, and she woke up 3 days later, surrounded by her family. Sarah says the experience made her more grateful for life, even the hard days. Every sunrise is a gift, she said. These stories, and thousands like them, are collected by places like the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, NDERF. Founded by Dr. Jeffrey Long, NDERF has documented over 5,000 NDEs, many from seniors who describe seeing loved ones, feeling divine love, and coming back with a renewed sense of purpose. Part 8, The Science of NDEs, Real or Imagined. Now, you might be wondering, are these experiences real, or are they just tricks of the mind? It's a fair question, and scientists have been wrestling with it for decades. Some researchers, like those at the University of Virginia, argue that NDEs provide evidence of consciousness beyond the body. They point to cases like Margaret's, where people report details they couldn't have known, like the pen falling during her resuscitation. A 2001 study by psychiatrist Brian Weiss, published in Death Studies, documented similar cases, including blind individuals who could see during their NDEs. Other scientists are more skeptical. They suggest NDEs are caused by the brain's response to stress, like oxygen deprivation or the release of endorphins. A 2018 article in PMC notes that 95.6% of NDE experiencers believe their experiences were real, but medical explanations can't fully account for the vividness or veridical details. The truth? We don't know for sure. But for people like Margaret, John, and Sarah, the reality of their experiences is undeniable. Some folks say it was just my brain playing tricks, Margaret said. But I know what I felt. That love, that light, it was more real than anything in this world. Part 9, Lessons from the Other Side. So, what can we learn from these stories? For one, they remind us that life is precious. Every moment we have with our loved ones, every sunrise we see, every laugh we share, it's a gift. NDEs often inspire people to live more fully, to love more deeply, to forgive more freely. They also offer comfort. Many of us have lost spouses, parents, or friends, and we wonder if we'll see them again. These stories suggest we might. In a 2001 study from the University of Virginia, 74 out of 553 NDE cases involved meeting deceased loved ones, often with profound emotional connections. Finally, they challenge us to face death without fear. As we age, thoughts of mortality creep in. But stories like Margaret's show that death might not be an end, but a beginning, a transition to a place of love and light. Part 10, My Own Journey, a Personal Reflection. I mentioned earlier that I had my own NDE. It happened 5 years ago, when I was 70, during a surgery that went wrong. My heart stopped for 3 minutes, and in that time, I saw something I'll never forget. I was floating above the operating room, watching the surgeons work on me. I saw my wife, Betty, in the waiting room, clutching her rosary, praying. And then, I was moving through a tunnel, toward a light so bright it should have hurt my eyes, but it didn't. At the end of that tunnel were my parents, who'd passed away 20 years earlier. They looked young, happy, and they told me it wasn't my time yet. When I woke up, I was changed. I stopped sweating the small stuff, traffic jams, bills, petty arguments. I started calling my kids more, telling Betty I love her every day. I even took up painting, something I hadn't done since high school. Life felt bigger, more meaningful. That's why I'm sharing these stories. They're not just about death, they're about life. They're about what matters most: love, family, faith, and the courage to keep going, no matter how old we get. Conclusion: a call to live fully. So, my friends, what's the takeaway? Don't be afraid. Death is a part of life, and from what I've seen and heard, it's not something to dread. It's a doorway to love, light, and reunion with those we've lost. But until that day comes, live fully. Hug your grandkids. Call your old friends. Plant that garden you've been dreaming about. And if you've got a story like Margaret's, share it. It might just change someone's life. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you've had a near-death experience or know someone who has, drop it in the comments below. Let's build a community of hope and wisdom. And if this video touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with your loved ones. Together, we can spread these messages of love and light. Here's to living every day like it's a miracle, because it is.